What is up, my peeps? Joshua Smith here at GSD Studios. First off, thank you so much for checking out today's content. I'll make this extremely fast, but I need to plug our sponsors that make this show possible. Our first sponsor is PerfectStormNow.com, by far the most effective and affordable real estate agent website and database platform in the industry. It is the system I use to sell 50 plus homes every single month. Check it out at www.perfectstormnow.com. Our second sponsor is my personal 90-day mastery bootcamp, which is, again, my personal real estate agent mentorship program where we spend 90 days together, 12 live sessions. You get daily access to me inside the program. You guys, we go so extremely in-depth. There's nothing that's incomplete about this program. You're going to get all the tools that you need to go out there and crush it inside your real estate business. Make sure to go check us out, www.90daymastery.com. You can watch in-depth videos of exactly what's covered to see if the program is for you. See all the raving testimonials we have from all of the amazing agents and clients that went through the program. So make sure to check us out, www.90daymastery.com. All right, you guys, let's jump on into today's content. What is up, my peeps? Joshua Smith here with another GSD mode interview. Every single week, we interview top entrepreneurs and just straight up top badasses out there dominating their space. These are people choosing to not live a life of mediocrity, but instead to go out there and create big, amazing, epic lives for themselves, their families, as well as have a big impact on others while they exist. So today, you guys, we got a really special guest on. Our guest today, one of the reasons I'm really excited to have him on is, you get a lot of these quote-unquote gurus out there, coaches, consultants that haven't done it themselves. And our guest today, massively successful consultant, entrepreneur, but he's also done it, right? I mean, he's personally scaled, built massive companies. Again, he's not just one of these guys that talks. He walks the walk and does what he says, right? So our guest today, you guys, he helped 10x Beachbody sales from 100 million in yearly revenue to over $1 billion in yearly revenue in 8 years as the senior VP. He has really managed and mastered offline and online media with over 500 million spent over his career, right? So everything, again, from offline to now in the online digital age, mastering Facebook, social media, squeeze pages, and now is currently building Round 2 Partners, which is a consulting firm helping companies scale that are in that 20 million to 100 million range that want to massively scale up and grow their business. And really his firm today has 3 core focuses that we're going to go really deep in on the podcast. And I love these. Number 1 is customer lifetime value. Number 3 is brand building. And then number 4 is just the overall operations and systems inside the company. So really stoked and honored to have Babak Azad on the show. My friend.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, this is going to be great, man. Because one of the issues that so many entrepreneurs have is those scaling issues, right? Like if you read the E-Myth Revisited, right? They get into it. They never are able to develop the systems to really delegate, develop that team around them. And they end up just kind of having, hopefully a high paid job, but ends up being a job for the rest of their life. So really stoked to get into this, man. I know it's going to be massive value to our listeners as well. But before we get into that, I'm really interested and intrigued in like your journey that led you to where you're at in the first place. If you rewind the clocks, like how did you get, into the entrepreneurship space and into the marketing space that you are in the first place?
Sure. So I would say I am not a born and bred entrepreneur. And so my story is not one of those where I was 7 years old and had the lemonade stand. If anything, I kind of had a bunch of ideas that I didn't execute on, frankly. It took me a while to get to this point of kind of being on my own and not being an employee. So I think that's, that's my version of it is I don't come from that. And my dad had his own thing and he was an architect and a developer, but it wasn't like I grew up, knowing that this is exactly what it was going to be. So it's kind of neat, I think, because it's evolved over time. And I think as I talk to some of my friends, it's encouraging because I think some people are like, you hear Gary Vee talk, or some of these other folks are like, yeah, I was born to be like this from the very beginning. For me, it came a little bit more, it evolved. And so, I went to MIT undergrad. I was a math major there and frankly had no clue what I was going to do. I liked math, and I was like, look, I'm going to go enjoy college. Did investment banking for a bunch of years. And then went to business school at Stanford, which everyone described as being this really entrepreneurial place, especially back in the late 90s. A lot of tech companies came out of Stanford. I'll say like I came out in '01 where the economy was starting to get a bit rough. And so I actually did come out and start a magazine. And so I did come out, was one of the handful of my classmates at that time who came and wanted to do something entrepreneurial. And we've had some, obviously, have done that since. But I started a magazine here in LA. It was a free magazine for gyms and yoga studios. I got a lot of humble pie coming out of that experience. So, I think I'd been a lot of, like one of my professors said, you've done a lot of analysis, but you haven't done enough doing. And, being a math major, investment banking, business school, it's a lot of analysis and all that. But the idea of leading, of selling, of managing really wasn't core of what I did. I really had this very naive approach of if you build it, they will come. And I think anyone who started something knows that that is totally not the case. And one of my friends put it best that starting a business is like reviving the dead. You have to go and yank and claw. And so I will say in retrospect, those were a miserable couple of years. It was really a year and a half. I failed miserably. I was living with my parents. I was 30 years old, hadn't worked out in ages, was probably 100 grand in credit card debt, hadn't been on a date. And the kicker was that I drove a minivan that beeped when you put it in reverse. So that was not the highlight of my life by any stretch. But and I'll be honest, like after I shut down the magazine, I basically had another 2 years of really rough times personally. And I look back, I don't wish those on other people. I'm glad I went through it kind of thing. But those were really rough times, and I really questioned a lot of what I'm made of. Am I cut out to actually have my own business, things like that. And so what I ended up doing was I did a bunch of consulting jobs here and there. I was the legal version of Napster for 2.5 years. That's back in the 2004, 2007 range. And we were getting killed because the iPod and 99-cent downloads were the thing. Spotify and RDO were nowhere to be found. And then I got lucky and a headhunter called me up, and that's when I joined Beachbody in '07. So, and then I can talk about that, but I helped to build finance and analytics, and then kind of grew as the company grew. But let me stop there for a sec. But yeah, that's a little bit, and then I certainly can go deeper into what I did at Beachbody and then since.
Yeah, love it, man. But yeah, just a couple follow-up questions. So in that, with the magazine, after you realized that the magazine wasn't going to be the success you thought it was, you decided to shut it down. That 2-year rough patch. Kind of walk us, like what was going on, man? Like what created the rough patch? Was it the magazine, or was it that, because I know a lot of people that go to college, right? I was a college dropout, but it didn't last long for me. But, I know a lot that go to, because we kind of get sold this like false story when we're growing up. Like, especially if you go to MIT, you go to Stanford, you think like, boom, you got the meal ticket then, right? What was that internal suffering and those tough patches from the vision not lining up to what you thought, or was it more magazine-led? Like what was going on internally during that time?
Yeah, there was a lot of things I'm not proud of in terms of just not having the level, I think, of ambition and going after it. I really was in my head, I had this idea that I wanted to be an entrepreneur and I wanted to go do my own business. But if you look at the behavior and the action I was taking, it didn't line up. And so I got caught up in that analysis paralysis mode. Certainly, I definitely acknowledge it. Like I had a bit of an ego. I needed that humble pie. And so, I think coming out with, solid, academic resume and banking, should have teed me up for certain levels of success, but also was a little bit fixated on, doing something on my own. In 03, 04, it wasn't a good economy. So that was a component of it, but ultimately I own it that, I didn't want to go get a job and I wanted to go do this. And I probably still have it somewhere. I had a list of like 20 ideas and I couldn't pick. And I think the worst thing that I did was I didn't choose. And by not choosing, that's the whole thing. I made a choice, but I got so caught up in this analysis paralysis mode of just pick one and go with it. I never did that. And that's where there's a lot of personal angst that I went through. And, I was playing online poker, and I had buddies who played blackjack. And so that was part of it. I was doing these one-off consulting gigs. But if you look at really, I have a thing on my board now that says focus on the process that's going to get you the results, as opposed to I was so fixated on this outcome as opposed to the process. And you look at what I did, I was being lazy. I was hoping, hope is not a strategy. I was waiting for a phone call. I was waiting for someone to pull me in, as opposed to going out and, use the word hustle, but just to go out and go do the things that I needed to do. And then finally, again, like I got a little bit lucky that a friend of mine from business school called me up and, you know, they needed some help at Napster. But I've learned a lot about like, man, you got to go make it happen. And I wasn't. And, you know, that's just the reality of it. I don't care what your background is and your resume is, you know, especially if you want to go start your own thing, it's not going to be on a silver platter by any stretch. And I was naive. That was arrogant. It was all those things. And hopefully I'm much less so in that way. I don't think I've ever gotten rid of all of it, but, you know, I certainly can appreciate those rough times and what people can go through. And whether you've gone to college or not, you know, I think you got to take advantage of the opportunities, but you got to go make it happen.
Yeah, love it, man. Love it, dude. So, all right. So then you get this opportunity at Beachbody and that 8-year time frame. I mean, you know, with hindsight, I mean, 8 years might sound like a long time going into it, but blink of an eye, 8 years goes by pretty damn quick. And,
sure.
And you help take that company from, you know, the $100 million company to this, you know, multi-billion-dollar juggernaut that it is today. You know, kind of walk us through like what did you do when you started off at Beachbody? What was it like experiencing that growth? And then, you know, just kind of a follow-up question that so I don't forget later is, you know, I know that, you know, marketing is become, you know, an extreme specialty to you. Is that where, you know, you experienced I guess the love for marketing and you discovered you had that gift? Because before this, it sounded like your gift was the numbers.
Yeah. And I think so. The answer is yes. I had no direct response background, didn't know performance marketing. I didn't know any of that stuff. I mean, frankly, when I got out of college, I didn't know what a P&L, I didn't know how to read an income statement. So, you know, certainly, again, didn't grow up with all this being in my blood. You know, you got to learn it. And luckily there are resources today out there. But one thing I will say just right off the bat, I know a lot of people, you know, I think it's when you talk about the numbers at Beachbody, first of all, I joined when there was a good amount of scale, but a lot of people don't necessarily even care about growing to $1 billion. And I think one of the things I found is, and the thing I speak to is a lot of the things that I learned are applicable to 6-figure businesses to 8, 9. So, you know, I think that's one of the cool things I've learned, especially in the last couple of years. When I first got there, I think looking back where I think $100 million business would have been professionally processed systems, you know, there were a lot of things that we were not doing great, but we were doing the right thing. I should say when I first joined, we're doing enough of the right things really well. And I think, you know, one of the lessons I've learned, I certainly learned about scale, but I also learned you got to survive long enough in spite of yourselves. And I think it's a lot of times it's easy to think that these big businesses, whatever you consider big being, have it all dialed in. They have all the resources. The reality is they all are going through their same pain. And if you actually saw, literally telling someone today, like, you know, how long it took us to set up a new landing page, just because we had legacy systems. Like today, it's like you can do it in a heartbeat. You know, we had massive problems there. So, you know, a lot of it was getting in. I really didn't know what I was going to do. I remember my first few months sitting there going, I don't know what I'm going to do in this role. I've got to figure it out. And so I did what I know how to do. Especially at that time was I knew how to dig through data. And I just literally was just combing through things. And, you know, I helped to build the analytics team there because they had someone or kind of one-off people doing it, but basically helped to build a team so that there were many people. When you're in a $100 million business, there are a lot of stones to look under. There's a lot of things to do. And so not to, say that there wasn't it going on, but really try to take it up to the next level. And then really after 3 years, I really wanted more accountability and ownership. And so we kind of created this role to oversee media and customer acquisition, which was heavy TV. That was our bread and butter, and certainly infomercials, phone sale. And, you know, I'll be honest, like we were not great in my time at cold traffic online. And so we could, again, a lot of things we missed out on. I think a lot of times it's easy to look and think that there are missed opportunities. But I will say one of the core things we did really well, and I think is a key to success and scale in any business, is we found what worked and we went deep and hard into it. And so at Beachbody, it was TV and it was the multi-level marketing side of the business. And I think the way that translates to people today is I think people see like Google, Facebook, Pinterest, YouTube, and they think they got to do all of them. Where I've really seen success, and I tell people, is it's 2 offers, 2 channels. That's what you need. And so when you find something, you go deep, you go hard in it. And I think, frankly, that's one of the biggest lessons I learned at Beachbody was when you find success, and even at the expense of not being great at digital, we found success with TV and with the network marketing side of the business.
Yeah, love it, man. So then, you know, when you decided that you wanted more ownership, more responsibility, and kind of created this position, if you will, was that from combing through the numbers? Did you identify that, hey, this is where I see we can have the biggest impact and upside? And if so, like, what kind of recommendation would you have for entrepreneurs that are listening that, that they can potentially go through their data. And I mean, maybe they're missing like those key two things in their own business and they don't know what to focus on. How can they use that analytics to focus on those things?
Yeah. And I'll say like, there's a little bit of luck in performance marketing. You know, at the end of the day, it's part of it's measuring and then figuring out what you're doing well, what you're not. And so that taps into my core strength, which is analytics. And, you know, I had to grow into being a marketer. And I remember this one moment where I started managing media and had a team, obviously, helping to do that. But the CEO sent me a note saying, how come we're not spending more? And I think when you come from a finance and analytics background, it's easy to point fingers. It's kind of easy to say the numbers say this, but I think there are times where you have to learn to take smart risks. And I think we've all seen situations where you can optimize yourself out of business if every campaign you just keep dinging away, and you got nothing left. And so I will say I absolutely had to grow into being a marketer. I'm now, I'd say, a fairly aggressive marketer when things support it. And so not from the claim side or kind of that kind of thing, but just I believe that when you find something, you go hard into it. Again, understanding what your constraints are in the business. But I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing I tell people is start reporting. So I've worked with businesses, and whether it was Beachbody and certainly in the last couple of years, that have fully advanced, sophisticated systems, and some that literally it's like basic stuff out of Shopify, out of GA, and it's Excel based. And my thing is like, just start. So wherever you are, you know, there's this kind of thing of whatever you report on gets better and what you don't report on doesn't. There is this magical thing, and I hate using that word, but there is an effect that once you start reporting and tracking, because it's in front of you, you're going to ask questions and things are going to get better because you're actually looking at it. So, you know, I come from a math major background, but I've written a blog post about this. Like, most business metrics is not college math, and it's barely high school math, right? It's literally like, how much traffic did you get? What kind of, like, how many visitors, how many conversions, like basic stuff. But I'd say a lot of businesses just don't have those basic dashboards and reporting in place. And I tell people, like, dude, hire some dude out of college who is good at Excel, who's hungry to learn, and just start some basics in place. And then there's always time to get much more sophisticated. So I've done a whole spectrum of super advanced and super basic. And wherever you are, like, go with it. And that's your starting point.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the path is in the math, right? And you know, I mean, to be able to make those strategic, smart risks and take those risks, like, you need to know, hey, is what the ROI, like, hey, if I stick $1 over here, does it give me 4 back? And you're right, man. I mean, I coach and consult in the real estate industry, and 90% of those that I talk to, man, they're not even running monthly P&Ls. They have no tracking. They have no idea how much activity equates to an acquisition, and it's scary, right? So,
right. And by the way, on that point, I think this stuff is applicable. So I have a client, Kent Clothier, who's got real estate worldwide in the real estate space, right? And so whether you're selling widgets or you're in real estate, some of it's like the basics and fundamentals, and that's what I focus on, which is like whether you're a real estate agent or otherwise, how many direct mail pieces did you send out? How many phone calls did you make? How many visits did you have? Like, understanding those numbers. Again, not rocket science things, but I'd say a lot of people really miss this, and they just don't add it because they're either scared of high school math or they're just like, I got friends who are like, I just don't want to touch the numbers. I'm like, dude, we're not talking really hardcore things. And I think sometimes you have to get over yourself, or you have to hire someone to help you with that. But in every business, understanding kind of your funnel and your metrics is crucial.
Yep. And to kind of piggyback on that, man, I mean, I get that it sucks, right? Because I mean, I love sales. I love, entrepreneurs, salespeople. I mean, they want to be face-to-face. They want to be out there, but dude, I mean, it takes minutes a day.
Yep.
Right? It sucks to do, but literally slow down, take 2-3 minutes a day, report the numbers. It's all it takes, right? So, all right, man. So then, okay, so you're going through this, building this great career, helping with Beachbody. What then gave you, I guess, like, what was that crossroad like where you're like, because I'm sure you could have continued staying there, continued creating massive success for them and yourself. Like, what was that like internally, and what were those crossroads like where you made the decision to go off on your own, and what ultimately led to that decision?
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's an interesting process. I will say that from the time I decided to leave to the time I left was 16 months, and that is not a short time. So, and I think it's important. I can tell people that I'm actually proud of that. And I want to tell people that because I think a lot of times people think, well, once you make a decision, you got to leave right away, or you got to move right away. And it's not to say I wasn't moving, but it took me a little bit. And the reality is sometimes it does do that. So I was part of a couple of digital marketing mastermind groups. I remember I was talking to a guy named Chris Haddad, who's a phenomenal copywriter. We were in Vegas, and I've told him this, it was a conversation with him that I came back. It was November of 2013. And I remember I came home and I told my wife, I said, it's time. I got to go. And, fortunately, she's been 100% supportive. We had just had our first baby boy at that point. He's now 4. And her dad is an entrepreneur. So certainly having the support from her was unbelievably important. And I don't think I could do it without that. At the same time, it took some time because we got a mortgage. At her, we had a new baby. And so I don't have 50 million in the bank, right? And even then, I don't think it would have been the smartest decision to leave right away. So I had to go through this, I had to go figure out, what am I going to go do? Okay, that's great to say I want to go run my own thing or be a founder or owner. But at the end of the day, like, what does that mean? And what was that? So I went through a lot of times where I was close maybe to going to another job or going to start something, and then things fell apart. Interestingly enough, once I ended up leaving, I'd met a couple folks. There was someone from internal. We were going to go start something. And within 3 months of leaving Beachbody, like, the startup failed and we were done. And so even then, it was as much as I had planned and thought and all this stuff. And that's just the reality of, doing a startup is, as much as it takes 16 months to get out of there and finally decide what I wanted to go do, 3 months after that, the whole thing had gone away. And I was out and, I didn't want to go back to Beachbody, and, I had a phenomenal career and owe a lot. I met my wife through one of my best friends there. So, phenomenal memory of that, but it was time. And so that process, though, when I tell people this, I'm like, dude, you can complain and say you want to go do it, but what are you doing every single day, every single week to actually move yourself forward? And there may be times where you think you're close and then it falls apart. And that's why you got to always have that pipeline of whether it's sales leads or it's like you want to go to a new job or you want to go start something. Yeah, you got to go all in at some point, but you also got to keep some of that pipeline going. And trust me, and there were plenty of times it was really frustrating to, come home or just talk to my wife and say, I thought this was going to happen. I feel like I'm back to square one again. But at the end of the day, it was important enough. And, I had to figure it out because I just knew I wanted to go do something, that was more my own thing. And not that I didn't feel a sense of ownership and pride in what we were doing at Beachbody, but there's a difference between being entrepreneurial internally and, externally, certainly. So, but yeah, man, it was that's why I say, like, I wasn't born this way. When I made my decisions, I'm not one of those guys who just like, it came naturally and authentically and all that stuff to me. Not that it's not authentic, but man, some things take time. And it's really frustrating. And saying it's 16 months from the time you make a decision and the time you leave, like, when you're living it, it feels like forever. And so in retrospect, yeah, it's my memory, but it felt like absolutely forever. But I also knew, again, I had responsibilities that I couldn't just leave and, we got to pay bills and it's the reality of it, right? So we got to manage the practical side along with your hopes and dreams and passions and all those kinds of things. But, kind of working at it now.
Yep. Love it, man. So those that are maybe in that position, that are watching, listening, that have that corporate job, right? But they know deep down that they want to be an entrepreneur. They know that that's the path and journey they want to take. In retrospect, would you have done it differently? Would you, like, for example, worked at Beachbody during those hours and then worked on the side to start creating the foundation for this business and transition differently? Or, like, what kind of advice, now that you've been through that, would you give?
Yeah, I mean, so there are parts of it I definitely would not do differently. And I mean, again, this is knowing that what I left to go do didn't even happen. Like, we literally couldn't get out of our own way because we had been planning and talking, and literally we just, like, the team just didn't gel. And so from, within 10 days, we'd gone from 4 to 3 founders. And then within 2 months after that, we were down, like, it was done. So, and I will say that, we were working nights and weekends and we would do a trip here and there. And I think now, again, there's a lot more information out there to do your hustle and to kind of do your side job and whatever. The reality, again, for me, like, Darius was probably 1.5. And, I had a relatively newborn infant. I had a full-time job that I had to excel at. And then my wife got with her second baby, right? So there's a point where you can say, yeah, I can work 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., but man, I was tired. So there's also a point where your body, and like, I consider myself in decent shape and like I can press pretty hard, but there's also sometimes just a practical reality. Plus, I want to be there for my kids and I don't want to miss all those years. And that is a personal decision that people have to make for themselves. Like, there's no right answer for Do I have judgment on someone who does it the other way? Absolutely not. You got to make your own decision. And so if you're single or you got kids or you got a bunch of kids or you're divorced, whatever, like you got to figure that out for yourself. What's important. I will say this, so you got to pay the bills, but there's always time to make more money. So if you're kind of making it and you're doing okay, and, for me, that idea, and I'm probably giving up a percent of whatever my income is because I'm optimizing a little bit. I mean, I work my ass off now, but it's important for me to spend time with my wife and my kids because they're only 2 and 4 for so long, right? And so there is that, and I think there was that dynamic happening when I was at Beachbody. So yeah, we were doing the side hustle, and it still worked out the way it did, which 3 months after I left, like I was kind of at starting all over again. So, I think I understand the practical side. I'm probably a little more pragmatic than I am super risk tolerant, but I'm actually reasonably risk tolerant. But I think I got to keep literally my house in order, and I got to pay the bills. And so there is that appreciation of like, it's really easy to say, oh, just leave. But the reality is like, you got to pay the bills. Like not all of us, and I don't have 50 million to kind of skate by. But the reality is I think actually it helped me make actually a better decision to be more thoughtful. But I think the challenge is every day, every week, every month, are you to get you to that place? And so for me, if you want to go start something, you've got to be having the right conversations. And by the way, there were times where like, man, I excelled at my job and I was about to be promoted. So I was still nailing it, but I also like certain parts, that last little bit, I wasn't doing probably like I would have a few years earlier. But it was certainly enough for me to be nailing my job. But that last little bit was time with my wife and my kids or with the startup or things like that. So, man, those are tough balances. And like this whole idea of work-life balance, man, that's a farce. But you got to just figure out what works for you.
Yeah, love it, dude. So, all right, so you fast forward today, man, and I mean, now you have an extremely, extremely successful business. So, you go back to the day of your list of 20 ideas, right? And then you had this other startup that just failed. It seems to me like one of the main reasons, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons that your business today is so successful is that you really honed in on like what your superpower is when it comes to entrepreneurship or helping businesses grow, right? Like how did you go from having a list of 20 to identifying, hey, here's what my superpower is. Here's what we're going to focus on. Because man, you've really dialed in your niche. You've really dialed in your strengths. And now it's just catapulted, right? Like how did you identify that to be able to do what you do now?
So, first of all, in the last, again, where I am today and where I was 2 years ago, it's different, hopefully, obviously. But, the reality was I just started picking up clients and I started, I had to talk to a buddy of mine and, realized where I was in my life, what I wanted to optimize for and what was important to me. And part of it was I frankly never thought I would be a consultant. And I think a lot of people shy away from that title. And, my list of 20, I'm not doing any of those. That was a bunch of years ago. And actually, like one of them, it's funny because one of them was to go compete with Jamba Juice, and all these juiceries now are out there, right? So I kind of laugh, and I'm like, that was probably one of them. Probably the other 19 might have sucked, but but I'm not doing any of those 20, and I'm actually doing something I never thought I would do in the sense of I thought I would have to be with someone else, I'd have to be collaborating, but the reality was I just started, and I had a network, and I just said, look, I'm going to start consulting. I have no clue how to price my services, but I'm just going to start and let's see where it goes. And it has absolutely evolved over time to figure out, what are some of the categories and the businesses and types of things. And so like now it's paid media, it's e-com, they're generally consumer, generally subscription, because a lot of the things I do now, it taps into my strength from an analytics side, but also from a marketing side. And I think that's one thing I do really well is I know how to blend the two. So I ain't a copywriter. I'm not a designer. I'm not a production guy. I suck at those things. And I know very clearly if anyone comes to me and says, I want to write copy, can I hire you? I'm like, you are talking to the wrong person. But like, I know how to use information to help people build their marketing and to scale the business. And so the reality though was my first few clients were just through people I knew and like that hustle, right? Like, do you need something? I'm here, blast it out to everybody. And then now it has gotten a lot more refined. I put out content. I have a blog. I'm out there. I speak. I'm on podcasts. Like I do various things. And it's very much now about, I have a much clearer sense of who my target is and saying no. Hopefully, I'm in a position now where I can say no, which is great. But it's also, man, I've been working this for 2 years. And I'd argue there's a lot of professionalizing I still got to do. And I'm not even trying to build a big agency or big consulting firm, but the reality was what I did differently than I did 15 years ago was I started. I literally I didn't start when I had that list of 20. I didn't do any of them. And again, I got responsibility, so I have to do that. But that's a big difference. Whereas I actually just started getting out there and I started testing by doing, as opposed to talk about it, strategize, all these kind of go to coffee and talk about stuff. Like that doesn't make anything happen. Like you got to do a little bit of that and then you got to start working it. And then I got feedback from clients where some things worked well, some didn't. I figured out where I sucked and wrong fit and things like that. And then, you keep tweaking it until you hopefully get to a place. And again, I still got a lot of work to do on that, but I'm in a much better place and I feel much more clear about who I'm better working with and who I'm not better working with.
Yep. So
it's a big deal.
Yep. Yeah, no, I love it, man. So through this, like you said, you got very clear and a lot better on who to work with, who not to work with. And, there's this saying out there that the riches are in the niches, right? But people will talk about, you got to identify your avatar, identify your idea, like what that focus is. But so many people really struggle with that. And you've gotten it really narrowed down to what that is specifically. For those that are trying to identify a niche, like what kind of suggestions would you give them? Because it's talked about so often, but still people, man, there's a lot of confusion around it.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of different ways. I think some of it's, the marriage I say of three things. It's what are you great at? What's your highest value? And what are you excited about? So, I try to, ideally you get to those three, right? It's what are you great at? What provides massive value? And what are you super passionate and excited about? If you can do that, that's awesome. The reality is a lot of times you can't do that. But, for me, it was tap into what I knew I could do, what I knew people needed help with. But sometimes you have this idea of, I don't want to put myself into a niche and I don't want to paint myself into a corner because I may get pigeonholed in there and it's too niche. The reality is oftentimes people try to go way too broad to start. And so trying to be all things to all people definitely does not work. And so, trying to get some traction somewhere, get a handful of clients or launch a single product or get out there in the real estate market or whatever it is just get going. And so part of it is sometimes it's what's your lowest hanging fruit. Sometimes it's what's your friend doing that you can piggyback off of. Sometimes it's what are you just great at that you think may lead to something. There are multiple ways to approach it, but sometimes it's you got to pick one of those and go. And again, I've seen plenty of people, what you don't want to do is if you hate something, probably don't do that. And it sounds so obvious, but I know a lot of people who have put themselves in a corner because they've built something where they absolutely hate the business. They hate their customers. They hate their clients. Dude, you kind of knew this going in. So why did you do that? Right? Because it was easy or it was cash flowing and they end up getting stuck in that. So I think it's a matter of you got to figure out what can you provide massive value on, what is kind of interest to you. And by the way, I got a small Amazon business that I got going. And then I also have my wife is starting a business too. So, sorry, just coming back. Just because I'm on video. It's all good. But so I got something small and then that I kind of got into, and then, I found something that I've got, I'm happy with the success. But again, you got to get going. And so oftentimes people think, I got to tee it up for big scale. Man, if you don't survive the short term, the long term doesn't matter. So I think, figure out what niche means, whether it's an interest, a client, a category. There are many ways to skin that cat. You just got to kind of pick one. And, it's like exercise and workout programs and weight loss. Which one works? They probably all work. The one that works is the one that's going to work for you and the one you're going to stick to. Right. And so sometimes it's people there's ADD and there's so many things out there. They want to switch, man, just find one and stick to it. And you got to work it for a while. There are no silver bullets. And there's not an answer that I give that's applicable to everybody. I mean, I'm definitely not that arrogant. But there's a lot that I think people got to figure out for themselves, but man, it's a lot of testing. And the only way you test is you got to get out there and do.
Yeah. So speaking of that, man, so you identified what you're great at, what made you excited, but then when it comes down to what brings the most value, right? So when you were going through this, right, you're taking on clients, when you developed your niche, was it just identifying through getting that feedback and seeing how those businesses were impacted, that was the clientele that you knew you could have the highest impact on? I mean, is that how you identified that and really went through that process?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you an example of something that didn't work. So I tell people, like, I have a very strategic and analytical approach towards what I do, not surprisingly. But I worked with a client that we basically worked on a strategic plan. The problem was, and I run into them every once in a while, and they've said, that was really helpful, very impactful to the business, but I couldn't tell you how much it was worth. And they can't tell you exactly how much it's worth. And I don't want to, as much as I'm a quant and like want to be results oriented, is that worth $1? Is that worth $1 billion? So one of the things I found out was I want to be able to measure my impact. And just like when you run media, you want to be able to measure the impact. How do I justify my rates and my pricing? Because I tell people, like, I'm premium for premium. Like, I am not the cheapest person. And that's why I work with businesses that have more scale. But at the same time, like, I want to be doing something where I can say, we did this differently and it's worth this much. So as much as I really enjoyed the strategy and those conversations and some of the coaching, and that's really fun, it's very like I feel a lot of personal value. I also figured out, like, how is that applicable to my next client? Or how do I take that as a case study? And when someone says, well, what was the business impact you had? And I say, well, they now have a clear strategy. What's that worth? Right. So I didn't want to be in that place. So some of it was, in the early days, early days of 2 years ago, I took on a bunch of clients. It was kind of people that I felt like there was something with, and then a bunch of them weren't the right fit in retrospect. And, sometimes it was on them, sometimes it was on me, but you learn hopefully over time. And then hopefully I'm making better choices now and saying no a lot more when I feel like it's not the right fit. And there are clearly some businesses where, again, if you want me to write copy, I'm not your guy. And so, not that I ever took that on, but there are definitely certain kinds of businesses now that are just probably not the right fit. Like, if you're a 6-figure business, the skills you need there to grow from 6 to 7 and 7 to 8, I wish I was great at everything. I'm not. So I'm not the right fit for that. And, I'm better at scale and I'm better where there's more complexity. So that took a little bit of learning though. And frankly, not having certain successes in certain places that I wish I had with some of my clients.
Yeah, love it, man. So then, I know you've got the 3 core things that you guys apply heavily in your business day and the clients that you consult with. How did you come up with those? I mean, those 3 things. Was it your experience at Beachbody? Now you're working with all these consulting clients. Was it just, again, hey, we wanted to identify, just like you talked about at Beachbody, the few things that are going to have the biggest impact, and these just all seem to be, as you were connecting the dots, the commonalities that were holding people back from taking it to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly so my 3 are really customer LTV, brand building, and operational excellence. And, customer LTV, I think many people in performance marketing and direct response, it's not a brand new term. And so it certainly taps into my strength from an analytics side. And as you think about running paid media, my view is like, I don't know how you run paid media without knowing what a customer's worth, because how do you know how much to pay to acquire them, right? And how much in the hole can you go? When do you have to break even? Things like that. So I'd say that's a much more of a core direct response performance marketing fundamental. Brand is something I am talking a lot more about. And I think a lot of performance marketers and DR marketers don't talk about brand nearly that much and as much as they should. And so from my perspective, and brand for me ultimately is about customer experience. So it's not Madison Avenue. It's not just go spend a whole bunch of money in Sports Illustrated or on TV that you can't evaluate the impact of it on, but it's about, are you building a brand, or are you building something that the idea of brand is coming through? And again, for me, that's core is about customer experience, because when I've looked at whether Beachbody or my clients now, people who focus on brand and customer experience, those are the ones who have a much greater chance of success to be scalable and sustainable. So if you're in the offer of the day world, I got no judgment. That's not who I work with, because some people, if they're just in a churn and burn model and they don't care about the product, they don't care about the customer, fine, that's what your business, that's not kind of the things. But if I look at businesses that are sustainable and scalable, generally speaking, brand is a part of it. Now, I can argue that Comcast is got a brand, not a good one, and is a monster business, but they got a monopoly, right? So it's a totally different business than there is today. But I also think that when you merge customer LTV and brand, you got a nice tension, because sometimes you think you're driving for more value, but you're actually hurting your brand in the long term. And then, it's like, what are the things that are brand building, but you can't just go spend in PR and try to get your brand out there without being cognizant of what's the ROI of it, right? So they actually blend really, really nicely together. When I talk about and then the third one is operational excellence, which is when you want to build something that's scalable. you got to build some version of a machine. So whether you're a consulting company, real estate, health and fitness, or a widget business, you're going to rely on other people. You're going to have systems and processes. And the faster you can get to some of those things, the better. Being mindful of cash, right? So I'm not saying if you're a $7 million business, I mean, yeah, 7 million, that you should go get massive enterprise and go build all these things, but you have to figure out at your level, what are the processes and systems that you got to put in place? Because it can't all be you. It can't just be like the person right there. You got to leverage, you got to get leverage. And whether that's vendors, technology, people, whatever it is, you've got to build that machine. And I think a lot of us have seen breakpoints at 10 million, 25, 50, and so on, where the processes and systems are broken. And that's why I focus on operational excellence, because you're going to have to build a machine. And so I think the LTV and the brand side are probably more marketing oriented, and then operational excellence is kind of on an overall basis.
Yeah. So if we break those down a little bit deeper, so when you look at LTV, you know, because I mean, okay, if you're selling, you know, coaching, consulting, or, you know, whatever, it might be a little bit easier to track the lifetime value than some other companies. Like what would you recommend? Somebody that's not tracking that, like what would they start with that? Like I heard the other day, like Proactive. I mean, they spend. It takes a year of a person being a client to recoup on what they spend to acquire that client.
Right.
But they're so dialed in on what their LTV is that they can spend a tremendous amount of money and upfront take that massive loss, right?
Not everyone has that luxury, right? And I get that.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, and so I think I was certainly spoiled at Beachbody that basically I could spend as much, because frankly, we broke even pretty quickly, but we also had a bunch of cash and we were a big business. So I think the reality is, whether you're brand new or you've been at it for a while, you got to start and figure out, like, where are you today? And so I work with some clients where, because of cash, they may be a $20 million business, but because of cash, they still have to break even in 30 days, or they got to break even in 90 days because they got operating expenses, they got inventory, they got bills to pay. So, you know, Proactive, I don't know exactly, but that's not necessarily a surprise to me. DirecTV, you know, they can subsidize the cost of installation, the cost of that box, because it's 2% churn. You're not switching from DirecTV to Dish just like that, versus like if I'm on one health and fitness program, I can easily switch to another, right? So understanding your business and your cash and your goals and your risk, all those things play a factor. So it's never for me to say, here's the right metric on when you should break even or what margin you should be targeting in. A lot of that is your own thing. And so like I'd say for my business, like I got to pay certain kinds of bills, so I can't go in the hole too deep in certain areas, versus like Proactive can go very deep. They also have so much history and so much data that they feel confident in what they're going to get over time. Now, especially if you're younger and as smaller as a business, you got to be more conservative. Unless you got deep pockets or venture funding or whatever, most businesses are bootstrapped. You may not be able to wait a year to break even. So if you got to break even on day 0 or 30 or 60 days, that's your constraint. You got to operate in that. And then as you get more history, hopefully as you get more cash or whatever it is, then maybe you can tolerate, you know, a longer break-even time. But there's not a right and wrong answer. You got to factor in your personal goals, your risk, your cash, and then just the dynamics of your model of how deep in the hole you can go. But ultimately, it's like, are you tracking it? Do you have a sense of, if you get a lead or a customer today, what are they worth over time? And I would say, like, even if you're starting your business today, just start tracking it. And over time, you just start to get more information, and that starts to feed your model. So you may have to start super conservative. That's what it is. I mean, I don't know what else to say. That's just the nature of it. And so, yeah, Proactive can do that. They've also been around for a long time. And by the way, they also have to be very mindful of early indicators of if they're not going to break even in a year, right? Because if your model is dependent on what's going to happen over 12 months, you got other factors that put you at risk versus if you're going to break even in 30 or 60 days. So, you know, I wouldn't say it's perfect. You just got to manage your own business, you know, in a certain way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, outside of not tracking it, like what is maybe one of the, you know, top mistakes or a couple top mistakes that you see people make with that tracking, right? Is it maybe not tracking, you know, the referrals that come from that person and just the purchase that they make, or like what are just a couple of the top mistakes that people know to avoid those?
So certainly right off the bat is like, do you have anything in place? So it sounds obvious, but do you have anything, whether it's Excel, GA, or some super advanced technology? attribution is the bane of everyone's existence. How Facebook and Google track things versus GA. And I'm not going to get too deep in like the last click, first click, whatever. But like sometimes you're triangulating, and I work with my clients on this, which is what does Facebook say versus what does GA say? And so sometimes it does take some time to look to see, and then where do you feel comfortable? You got to make sure that like if you have Google, Facebook, and your affiliate program going, you better not be adding up all those and see that's like 3 times what you're actually happening in your system, and you're giving full credit back to each one of those things, right? So double counting, that's one of the bigger mistakes I see people make. And then, just frankly, data integrity. So what happens in Facebook versus what happens in Shopify or whatever your system is, are you doing some level of validation to make sure that what one system says versus what the other? Because at the end of the day, like your cash in your bank account is king. That's all ultimately what matters. I don't care what Facebook says, but are you doing some level of comparing? And again, whether it's you or an analyst or whatever, man, go on Upwork, you go on Workable or whatever, you can find people for not that expensive to help you out with this if this isn't your core strength. But you got to be measuring some of this stuff, because one way or another, it's going to be measured in your bank account. So whether you like it or not, right? And so, I think the double counting, having things in place, and then just doing some sense of validation on what you think was happening and what is actually happening.
Yeah. Then, okay. So when it comes to brand, because, most people don't think of customer experience as a brand, right? They think of brand kind of like you alluded to before, being on a billboard, or whatever the direct mail pieces or, the advertising they're doing. But, and you're so right with, you look at like Amazon, right? Like why is Amazon, Jeff Bezos is the most obsessed human being on the planet about customer service and the customer experience. And that's probably why he'll have the first legal monopoly out there, right? So how can people start, what is the importance of tying those together? And kind of the same question of like, what is the common mistakes that most people are making when you see this?
Sure. Well, I think the first one is, does the word brand, is it part of your lexicon? Whether you got a one-person business or you got a team, how often does the word brand ever come up? And I say that because a lot of people, it never comes up. And I would say product or service, like those kinds of things, the quality of the product, the quality of the service, a lot of them don't care. And if you're in a churn and burn model, fine, that's great. But if you want to build something scalable and sustainable, like it's really hard to build something where the product really sucks. It makes everything a lot harder. So, I go back to something a professor at business school told me, and he told our class, he said, the golden rule was wrong, right? The golden rule, do unto others as you'd have done unto you. And I think as marketers, we think we know what's best for the customer, and we're going to take them down a funnel and jam them down a certain path. But, my professor said, do unto others as they would prefer to have done unto them, right? And if you look at how we behave as marketers, that's oftentimes not what we do. Now, Amazon, to your point, they've made a monster business about selection. There are a lot of things they do really well, right? 2-day, Prime, all that stuff. But you think about what do they do when you go to the site? They give you selection. It's not like I'm only going to show you one upsell. Here's the best thing. They give you recommendations, but they also give you selection and the ability to pick and choose. It is not a drive them down a hardcore funnel with upsell after upsell and things like that. They have upsells and they have cross sells, but they do it in a very different way. And so they've allowed people to pick and choose in a much better way. And then they use data to inform the recommendations. But I think that idea of what does a customer prefer? If you were the customer, how would you like to be treated? So as an example, if you are in a subscription business, sure, you can make people wait on hold for 15, 20 minutes to cancel because that's going to help your churn numbers, but that's a horrible customer experience, right? How many times have you called someplace and the first thing you hear is our menu has changed, please pay attention. I get it, your menu's changed, but like people want to move, they want choice. And so this is where you also have to pick, right? So it's easy to say, yeah, you make more money because you decrease churn by making people call, but at the same time, you're hurting your brand. And so again, I don't have a right and wrong, but I think are you being mindful of what your customers want? Like if you're in a subscription business, why are people canceling? Like, is it product? Is it price, which is usually value? Like, what are the problems that people have with your business or your service, your offer? And what kinds of things are you doing to get better? The reality is, like as I mentioned at the beginning, like a lot of times you got to succeed in spite of yourself until you get those things dialed in. But I'd say like, is the word brand like just part of the conversation? Do you care about the product? And by the way, the most daunting thing about this is that brand is built everywhere. It's build pre-purchase, post-purchase, when you call customer service on social media. And the reality also is we can do a lot to affect the brand. Ultimately, the customers control that. And it's what's been their experience. What do they put on social media? What are the reviews on Amazon? What do they put on YouTube videos? If they do an unboxing video, what do they tell their friends? They're the ones ultimately who are communicating the brand. As much as we try to do it, ultimately it's our customers and our clients that do it. And so what kind of experience do they have? And what are they telling people? Because more and more, that's what's happening, right? Is people are talking about it. It used to be you could hide and you could have just a certain kind of offer. People are doing research. And so I think the reality is you have to be mindful of brand because it's affecting your business today, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. And with it being so important, man, I mean, I think a lot of people that listen probably, get it and understand it. And if they put themselves, put on their own consumer hat, right, they know what they appreciate and like. But as an entrepreneur that's listen to this, I mean, how do you measure the customer experience, right? Especially when you say it comes down to every aspect of that communication. I mean, how do you effectively measure that?
So first of all, that's why I say it's daunting when it's affected everywhere. That's also the opportunity, but especially as a business gets bigger, that's also just being mindful that there are all these touch points. But I think you got to just start, and you got to, again, if you're the business owner, the founder, it starts from you. Are you the one communicating, again, whether you have agency partners, vendors, a team, or it's literally your one-man shop, whatever the case is, are you communicating to other people like, hey, we care about our customer? And by the way, this sounds obvious, this sounds basic, but I would ask people, how often does that conversation come up? What are we doing? Are we customer obsessed? Do we care about the customer, how they talk about us? Do we respond to things in a reasonably timely manner? So part of it really is there attention being brought to this? And, I think it can be overwhelming to say, yeah, there are all these touch points, but man, are you trying? Are you telling people it's important? Are you keeping people accountable? And when you really, the reality is we all screw up. We all break our commitments. So what do you do when that happens? What kinds of things do you try to do to make it better? Again, I believe the customer is always right. And I don't believe you should always do everything without reason to make sure the customer is happy, but are you taking steps? And, look at the reasons people cancel, look at the reasons people refund, look at the reasons people don't re-up, whatever the analogy is for your business, are you doing things to make them better? And frankly, do you care? Does your team care? And are there things that you're putting in place or working on to get those better over time? Again, some of this stuff is strategic and there's not a silver bullet, but for me, I have found that having the mindset and having the conversation and making sure it's front of mind is a big, big shift because for a lot of people, it really isn't happening day to day, week to week.
Yeah. When I think too, from coming from the entrepreneur side, I've been in business now for 12 years and run multiple companies. And man, it's not sometimes that you don't care about your customer, but when you're, growth pains can be much harder than slow pains. And sometimes you go through these growth phases where it's not that you don't care, but man, you're spread so thin, you're just trying to hang on, dude, right? And things slip, things get missed, and it's so easy to get missed if it's not something that's part of your daily focus.
Yeah, and I would say to those points, and look, we go through those, and again, whatever your level of your business is, the reality is sometimes you're just going to screw up, and that's not an excuse. But you also, I would say, are the screw ups recurring? Have they been going on for the last year or 12 or 18 months? Are you doing anything about it? Right. So when you scale, you go into those growth pains, whether it's organizational and operational, or if you ship a physical product and, you're going to screw up, and that's going to happen. The goal is not to be perfect. The point is more, is there something in place to get better? And, there are customers you're going to lose. You're never going to get them back, man. Sprint, I am never going back to Sprint because how they treated me 20 years ago. I have friends who love it. But the reality is it was such a miserable experience. I'm never going back. And that's the reality of it. And so there are customers where that's going to happen. And whether it was growth pains or otherwise, we've all experienced that as a consumer. I think as a business owner, I would say, are you doing things to get things better? Or if there's a certain pain point that's been recurring for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, can you point to saying, by the way, sometimes you try things and you fail. And sometimes you try to get them better and it just doesn't work out and you're back to the drawing board. I get it. Totally. There's not judgment around it. My question usually with my clients and with other folks is, what are there things you're doing? Has this been a recurring theme? And frankly, do you care? And sometimes it requires changing your vendor, changing employees, changing your process, changing your promise to your customer. Like at some point, like if something is causing this much pain, something's got to change, right? And so it's more a question of what are those things, and have you tried to do things differently than you have previously?
Yeah. And then when it comes down to the operation excellence, right? Because you hear things, entrepreneurs say things like, oh man, my biggest challenge is finding good people. If you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. And that's always a huge red flag that your systems and processes absolutely suck, right? And I don't think people understand the importance, because I don't care how great somebody is. If they don't have great systems and processes to follow, they can't show you their greatness. And somebody that doesn't have those dialed in, like, because people think that it has to cost all this money, but like, dude, you can create them on Google Drive and shoot video and upload, embed the YouTube. I mean, it can cost you nothing, right? Like, where do people get started, and what are the importance of those systems and processes? Yeah, I mean, so the first thing the most common thing I think I hear is, I can't find the right person. And I think especially as the founder entrepreneur, many entrepreneurs, and I don't say this at all negatively, are ADD, they're sales oriented. They don't want to focus on the detail, and they don't want to focus on all these operational minutia. Great, that's fine. So you got to find someone, but hey, I can't find that person. One of my first questions is, who are you hanging out with? And most of the time they're hanging out with themselves. And what I mean by that is, if you're an entrepreneur and you're ADD and you're that salesperson, are you looking amongst your friends who are just like you? Because if you are, you're not going to find the person you're looking for. So sometimes you got to go to more corporate events, right? And so sometimes you got to ask people who have worked in a bigger company, or who have had, and sometimes it's the people that you may not love to like think, oh, they're anal, or they're too CYA, or they're too negative, or like they're always focused on the details. That's probably the person you kind of need. But are you doing things to hang out with them and go find them? So that's the first thing, which is, I just see a lot of people hanging out with themselves, and they're at these, entrepreneur mastermind groups, things like that. They're like, oh yeah, none of us can find the right person. It's like, yeah, because everyone in this room is the same. None of these people are operationally focused. And that, by the way, that's not a negative thing about like you're a bad person. It just means your strength is in a certain area. You got to go hang out where the people who have that strength are. And so sometimes it is posting on job boards, going to like Shop Talk, or going to like, I will call them more corporate events, to go find those people. Because I guarantee there are people like me who are internal, who want to go work in a more entrepreneurial environment, and are more than happy to do that operational work with you, but you got to go do those things to attract them. So that's the first thing, is who are you hanging out with? And then, I think the tools that I use, some of the things I use right off the bat, I mentioned earlier, like Upwork and Workable is a platform that helps you really leverage the recruiting process. I did a post about, I basically had 500 plus applicants for a job, a part-time marketing role that I was hiring for. And I kind of show the process that's absolutely repeatable. But, I found like Workable, you put the posting on Indeed. If you actually use your marketing chops when you think about recruiting, so like, what's the subject line? What's the copy? Do you put people through a funnel? Sometimes you actually want to create friction, like in marketing and selling, you want to reduce friction. I think in hiring, you want to create a little bit of friction so people are jumping through the hoops. But I think that's a big part of it, is, are you attracting the right people, and use your marketing and sales skill to go find those people? And then look, to your point, many times we think that we have to have the best top of the line systems, processes, where to your point, it could be Google. It could be, I have Loom, Loom, which is a tool to record videos. So now every time I have an issue with whatever, I do a screen share, and I literally just do this raw video with a janky headset, and I record it, and that works, right? And so I've seen a lot of my clients do this, where when they're going through someone and they want to train someone, they don't have some massive architecture and some big system. Dude, they just use Loom, or they use Jing, or some screen share. The person records it. Here you go. And then if you have questions, come back to me, but here's your video, right? So like, that's kind of janky, but man, you could either do that, or you can think you need some $1 million technology to help you manage a thing, where
most of us these days are using Dropbox, Google Drive, or shooting video with this thing, right? And get over yourself on that. And I have to, by the way, I got to do the same thing. But, a lot of times this is more than sufficient to create video and to create content or whatever that is. So I think a lot of us, we overcomplicate it, or we think it has to be at such a level of perfection where, that whole thing of like done is a lot better than perfect, because sometimes we're trying to do perfect and it never happens.
Yeah. And then like, with your system with Loom, it's like, because again, I get that people get intimidated because it's like, man, this is going to take 100 hours for me to build out my internal playbook, right? But it's like, just do it while you're doing it, right? If you're ordering, this from this supplier, video record it. Hey, here's how you order this from this supplier. Go here, do this, and just do it while you're doing it. And eventually it gets done, right? So
yeah. And I'll give you a great example on this that I'm doing now, which is I'm just kicking it off. And so I'm struggling with creating content from a perspective of time. I'm like, I don't want to have to sit down and write a blog post and like, I got to sit however long it takes. So a buddy of mine told me, he's like, you got to be careful and you got to be careful of confidentiality, but record all your calls with your clients and then have a VA or have someone transcribe it. And essentially, as you're delivering your service, you're probably creating content. So I'm now going to take those files, hand them off to someone and say, go figure out, chop it up into 3 posts. Or, I've got to get a camera. And again, I'll probably set this thing up to record my calls and do go-to meetings and record them, hand them off to someone and say, go chop this up. And by the way, like, these are not $100 an hour people. They don't have to be that expensive to actually do really great work. And frankly, to do good enough to get going. And so the way I'm actually starting to now work on creating content is as I'm delivering my service, I'm creating the content, I'm having someone else transcribe it, edit it, and then I do a little bit of cleanup. But that's a lot more efficient and it leverages what I'm doing as opposed to I got to sit down and write a long article or whatever that is, right? So I'm trying to figure out how to leverage what I'm already doing to actually, frankly, get more clients, right? And for me, content is a big deal. And for a lot of people it is. So with my business, I can do that. And I have to be careful about confidentiality and what's sensitive, and I got to chop that out. But that's a lot faster, and I can leverage my phone calls and Skypes and things like that into creating content as opposed to it has to be done in silos. And so that point there is, how do you leverage what you're already doing today that can serve multiple purposes, right?
Yeah. Love it, man. So then when it comes to the systems and processes, I mean, what would your recommendation be for somebody that needs to go out there? I mean, they have a massive need for more people, but they don't have their systems and processes in place. Would you recommend, hey, man, put the hiring on hold until these are dialed in? You shouldn't be hiring until you have these dialed in. What would your recommendation be there?
Yeah, I mean, so sometimes the hiring has to help you get there, right?
Yeah.
So you may not have the skill. Like, it may be technology. Like, I was on a call yesterday about GA and Google Tag Manager. Like, I know how to go in GA, but I have no clue how to connect it. So like, if that's your issue and you don't know how to solve it, you got to go find somebody. But, part of it is going back a little bit of, as I talk to people about what are the highest value things that you're doing and what are the lowest value things that you're doing. So ideally, you're doing more of the former, not the latter, right? And so sometimes how you kind of create some system and process is figure out what's the lowest value thing that I'm doing and how am I spending my time in a way that's super low value, and can I offload that to somebody? So sometimes it's like that, and sometimes it's, do we have a process when we want to send up a new landing page? Like, what is the process to do that? To your point, and how you record things with the vendors, like sometimes it's literally, okay, let's just record it. And maybe then you hand it off to someone and they transcribe it. So sometimes it's literally just start doing it and record what you're doing, like have someone over your shoulder or whatever it is, and just start documenting it. So sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes it requires a lot more complexity, or it requires hiring someone in. But again, I think it's a question of what's your highest value, lowest value with your employees. It's kind of the same type of thing. And sometimes it's you offload it to a 1099, and it doesn't have to be a full-time hire, but it's about like, are you doing some things? And honestly, like, again, we overthink them. So what are some simple ways to try to create some system and process, or to just start to document, to say like, we're tired of making the same mistakes over and over again. We're tired of seeing the same complaints for our customers. What do we have to do differently? Sometimes it requires an offsite. Sometimes it requires a Google Doc. Sometimes it requires a video, right? So, just sometimes you just got to get going.
Now, for because you're working with, companies that are already very successful, that are wanting to scale to that next level. Is it really boiled down to like really just dialing in these three things, because I mean, if somebody's at 50 million and when they scale 200 million, it sounds like these three things are, hey, we got to get these dialed in, before you can get there. But is it really just dialing those three things? And once those three things are dialed in, man, then it's just foot on that accelerator?
Look, there are a lot of components to business, right?
Yeah.
So I would never be so naive or, make the statement that it's only three things. For me, ultimately, it's about leverage and where's the biggest bang for the buck. So there are plenty of things in an organization that don't naturally fall into customer LTV, brand, and operational excellence. So, and sometimes those things can be big, important things in the business. But these are some core tenets. So I'll give you an example of, I got a whiteboard over here. So I was on a call yesterday with a client, and we talked about 4 areas: traffic, LTV, adding SKUs, and operational expenses, actually, in that case. And he felt that he needed to add more SKUs to help build the business. And my point was, what are you doing with your existing customers and your existing clients? And in this case, it was customers. But are you maximizing your LTV? Because if you maximize your LTV, then it makes paid traffic that much easier. Because right now, he's running most of his traffic through content and affiliate, but he can't get paid to work. But if a customer is worth more, then you can afford to pay more to acquire them. So, in that case, like sometimes you do have to add SKUs and sometimes you got to add affiliate offers. So, but I come back to this stuff because for me, it's about leverage. And I found these as areas of greater leverage when you want to scale. So it's an operational excellence, by the way, is a very broad thing. It can be hiring. It can be if you have a brick and mortar location. It can be technology. You got to figure out for your business what that ends up looking like. But, to say it's overly simplistic and it's easy, absolutely not. But I would point to say, what are the key core areas of leverage in the business? And if it's not in one of those three, fine. But in my experience, those are some of the core areas where I've found particular success. Look, I'll be honest, that taps into my strength as well. But, and so like certain parts of a business like operations and warehouse and all that, that's not my core strength, but I know how to understand the business and the components of it to say like, is that becoming a problem in your business? And you need to go figure out how to make that better.
Yeah.
So, I think each business at its stage, and look, when you're at 1 million, 10 million, 25, and 100, there are different challenges you are facing. And so you got to understand where you are and there are categorically some things that are appropriate, but how you're executing at 1 million and 100 million, clearly very different. And so sometimes it's different people, different processes. Hopefully your people can grow with you, but sometimes they can't. And so sometimes it's a people thing that, look, I believe in giving people support and training, but sometimes if they're not the ones making the right decisions and they can't create a team and they can't delegate, sometimes they may not have the right people. So I guess that falls under operational excellence, but again, you got to understand what's going on in your business. What are the key pain points? What are the key levers? And then what are you doing to improve those things in a significant way?
Yeah. Well, and like you said earlier, I mean, I know your niche is really specific to companies doing 20 million to that 100 million in revenue that want to scale. But these concepts, right, are really the fundamentals that it doesn't matter if you're a solo entrepreneur making 50 grand a year, wanting to get to 250 grand a year. Yep. I mean, they apply to absolutely everybody.
Yeah. And by the way, look, my business is not 20 million. So I'm in that, I'm much lower than that. But again, to your point, I'm doing a lot of these similar things. And like, it's not a joke. Like when I have things on my whiteboard about processes, like I realized one of the mistakes I was making about 4 months ago was I was so focused on counts of clients, my revenue, things like that, as opposed to like, what's the process that's going to help me get better at acquiring customers and acquiring clients? And so like I tested direct mail. I'm testing content I know. And so there are certain things, but I figure put smart spaghetti up on the wall. And if I have some good ideas that I think that process over time will help me get customers and clients, then that's what I'm going to focus on and the results will come. I don't mean to be over simplistic. I got to pay my bills. I got things to do in that sense, but it's also like focusing on the process. Like I'm living that day to day. And it took me 18 months on my own business to just have that on my whiteboard. And I have to have it there because I need it as a reminder to myself literally every single day to say like, what's the process today? What are you focusing on? And what's the highest value place to spend your time? Yeah. And I literally have that conversation with myself every day.
I love it, man. I mean, it's what it's about, man. It's divide and conquer, right? It's kind of breaking down our systems and internal processes daily and see how we can build them better. And what I love about consultants and coaches, and, you know, I haven't went the last decade of my life without having at least one and usually multiple coaches, is we get kind of blind in our own business, you know, right? I always say, like, as the entrepreneur, the CEO, you're like the quarterback on the field. You think you see all the players in the field, but then you get blindsided by the linebacker. Like, you need that person in the skybox, right? That doesn't have the emotional attachment, that's going to identify things of it. So it's so ungodly important. And with that being said, man, for those of our listeners that, because I know, again, you put out a lot of free content, you've got, you know, your blog out there, those that want to start reading your content, start following you, learn more about you, that might have some interest in your consulting, where's the best place to go do that?
Yeah, the easiest place is my blog. So it's babakazad.com. I'm guessing you'll have a link in there in the show notes, but it's babakazad.com. Pretty much every social platform. I'm at Babak Azad. So just don't send it to babakazad@gmail, because I didn't get that one. There is another one out there, even though I was beta on Gmail. So there's someone else who has that. But yeah, my blog is the easiest place, and then pretty much every social platform I'm out at. So I'm definitely reachable.
Yeah, love it, man. Love it. So, all right, man, I know we're getting long on time. So just one last question for you. Yep. So knowing everything that you know now today, right, through this whole entire journey, if you could rewind the clocks and go back to the younger version of yourself, like right when you just graduated business school, and give yourself 2 pieces of advice that you feel would have really just fast forwarded your success. And I get to that. Everything happens for a reason, and you had to go through this journey to become the man you are today. But if you could go back and give yourself those 2 pieces of advice that you feel would have massively fast forwarded your success, what would those look like?
I think the first one is, and I guess I don't know if it's 1 or 2, is really like, don't overthink it and just get going. I definitely suffered from analysis paralysis, as I mentioned. And I think the way you got to be smart and thoughtful to a certain extent and do some research. But the way you learn, in my experience, and the way I've learned, and the way I've seen people who have had success, is they're out there. They're in the market. Because the market will tell you, right? And so that's the best form of feedback, as opposed to your friends who have time to meet you for coffee and, you know, the 10, 15 minutes and all the strategy and all that. So I think really the advice would be like, I think it would be that. And then I think the other thing I would say is, you know, I go in and out of loving Gary Vee and Grant Cardone, but one of the things that I loved about Grant Cardone's 10X book was that, you know, he made this point about, you know, a lot of people say, well, set the 10X goal. But what a lot of people will miss, and he makes this point in the book, that you have to 10X your effort too. And so that's not to say like you got to work 18-hour days. And like, again, you got to figure out what works for you. But I think that idea that expect it to be harder and take longer and be more work than you probably think it and want it to be. And if you know that going in, that I think it sets a little bit different level of expectation, and not to be delusional. And, you know, again, there are plenty of people out there who like, you know, pictures of fancy cars and passive income and all this stuff. Like, the reality is very few people are in that world. And I didn't necessarily suffer from that. I suffered from other delusions. But I think the idea of take action and then expect that you're going to have to do a lot of work to get to where you want to get to. And then the last thing, and maybe the third one, is have an idea of where you're trying to get to. Whether it's income, status, type of business, what you want, like what's important to you, having an idea of like where you're trying to go towards, whether personally, professionally, like otherwise, like how do you know like what good enough is? Like, should you be working till midnight every night, or do you dial it back? Like having some sense of what's important and what you're doing this all for, like, and whatever that is for you, that's for you. Like, it's not for me to say. But I think, yeah, so take action, expect it to be harder and more work than you plan, and then at least have a sense of where you're going, and then reset and check in every once in a while to make sure, like, you know, you agree or you're where you're going is, you know, where you want to go, because your life can change. You may have a wife and get married and have kids, and that may change your priorities. Great. So you got to adjust, right?
Yeah, love it. Powerful words, man. And those watching and listening, I know in every podcast with this, but information without implementation truly is just the start of delusion. Information is no longer power. It's taking action on that information that creates power in your world so you can create the life you know you want and deserve. And there's just so much amazing information shared with you guys today. Make sure that you're taking action on something that you learned. Don't wait. Take immediate action. And again, go out there and create that life that you know you want and deserve. Below will be all the links mentioned here in the podcast. podcast. That way you can also connect with Babak and start following him. Check out his blog, check out his services as well. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. And Babak, man, I know how busy you are. It's been a true honor having you on the show. I truly appreciate you taking time. You're busy to be here, man.
No, it's a privilege being here. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yep, 100%, my friend. All right, you guys, we will see you next time.